Hey guys, what's going on? It's Dan, and I'm joined again by Ryan. How are you doing today, Ryan? I guess I asked you this in the last video, but I'm going to have you repeat yourself for the
Yeah.
Kanto division.
As as of a couple hours ago when we recorded the Johto division, I'm doing pretty good. Now I've eaten dinner, so that's nice.
Excellent. Dinner is always good. But, like we said, we recorded the Johto division power rankings earlier, and now we are popping right into the Kanto division. A brief look at our methodology. It is the same for all of the power ranking videos. Coach doesn't matter. Individual matchups don't matter. It's just how good the teams are versus the rest of the league as a whole. That is what we are taking into account. Power rankings are not predictive, and because Ryan and I are different people, our rankings are not always going to be the same. In the Johto division, my ranking was the tiebreaker. However, in the Kanto division, Ryan's ranking is going to be the tiebreaker. Any final notes before we go ahead and dive into it, Ryan?
Yeah, we're equal opportunity tiebreaker here. That's born of a mutual respect and because reasons. PRs aren't predictive. They're not really supposed to be. We'll kind of get into the differences between the divisions as we go. It's really interesting because I think there's a very different kind of team dynamic going on between the two different divisions. So hopefully we'll get at least a little bit of a chance to talk about that at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have some time to talk about that. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and handle the first team here. I'm not going to go too much depth because they are my week one opponent, but it is the Latchkey Kids. So their team, the first thing I immediately notice is the Dracovish and the Tyranitar. The rest of the team is Oranguru, Gothitelle, I can't remember the name of that thing.
Obstagoon. How'd you forget Obstagoon? Your boy. You've tried to put that in like every tier imaginable.
I know. I've tried to draft it so many times. I'm very sad that I didn't get it this league. Drifblim, Golbat, Double, Phalanx, Greedent, and Brione. So, like I said, the first thing that stands out is obviously the Sand mode. In a vacuum, Tyranitar and Dracovish is the best weather mode from any two Pokemon. Like, there might be an argument for something in Venusaur with the sun, but I think this is the strongest weather mode in a vacuum. However, it is also the most expensive weather mode with being two Tier 1 options. So, the rest of the team needs to be able to support this kind of really powerful weather mode for the team to be as functional as I would like it to be. And that's where I'm a little nervous about some of the rest of this team. Like, Oranguru and Gothitelle are weird on the same team to me, using two Tier 1 slots. They do very similar things. I know Oranguru is probably a slightly better Trick Room setter, and Gothitelle does enable Perish Trap shenanigans, which Leaf is very much known for. But I think their similarities sort of cancel each other out for me, and that seems like it's one Pokemon that used two Tier 2 slots. I do think Obstagoon is going to be really good in this draft. I said it in Johto. I think Obstagoon has the potential to be fantastic in this format. This is the second league where Drifblim does not have an enabler on a team with it, which, I don't know, I find that to be a little weird. You generally think Drifblim in terrain so it can get the Unburdened to be a fast Tailwind, and Golbat, I was much higher on Golbat until I learned from Rolo that Golbat doesn't actually get Tailwind. I thought it was another Inner Focus Tailwind option, but I learned that instead only Crobat gets Tailwind, so I'm not a huge Golbat fan here, but I understand a few of the things it can do. With a double Phalanx, Greedent, and Brione round out the team, I think Greedent is actually going to be really good as a Trick Room option. Phalanx is interesting. I think there's some potential for it to work there. It also works to scare away some Intimidate options. Double can operate under Trick Room, doing some Body Press and Cotton Guard shenanigans. And then Brione is there, obviously, for Perish Song only. So, looking at this team, I think there's a lot of strong Mons, but I think overall it misses the mark on a couple key areas. First of which are speed tiers. They're pretty centralized, with no Pokemon being faster than Obstagoon at base 95. So if Sand isn't up, this team's never going to go first outside of Trick Room, and even in Trick Room, the best Trick Room options are Double and Greedent, which are both normal types that do they're not the same things. They're both setup options, basically. A couple other issues that I have are the type charts. I know I personally think type charts are overrated as a whole, but for this team in particular, there are some major issues that I have. Namely, they have 0 electric resists, and discharge is going to be a big thing this format. They have 1 fairy resist in Golbat, and Dazzling Gleam is going to be a big thing this format. And also ice resists. Their only ice resist is the Brione, which barely counts as a resist. So overall, I like a lot of the things this team does, but I think it needs some faster options that cover a couple of the type weaknesses, and that's what I would be looking for if I was Leaf in these transaction periods. But what do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, this team it's, T-Tar Dracovish is nice, but it has problems, and outside of that, I don't super love a lot of what this team has going on. In theory, it has a really fleshed out Trick Room mode, but in practice, I don't really think it will. Because something you haven't touched upon is the fighting weakness. So yes, there are some fighting resists. You have the Gothitelle, obviously, Golbat's a 4x fighting resist, and the Drifbloom's immune to it. So that's all like fine and good, but like you also have T-Tar and Obstagoon, with their both 4x weak, and then your 2 Trick Room, like 2 of your main Trick Room mobs are going to be that Gradient and Dubwool, which are both 4x weak to it, and Oranguru is also neutral. So even your Psychic type still takes neutral hits from fighting type coverage, which is kind of another thing that really stuck out to me. Yeah, it's mostly speed tiers, and some of the offense I'm not 100% convinced on. Overall, I think that those 2 tier 2s shouldn't be on the same team. Instruct is obviously really cool, Trapping's really cool, but I feel like 2 Psychic types where their roles are similar enough that I think they should probably be 2 separate Pokemon, especially to help out with the type chart would be good. Obstagoon's one of the things on this team I don't have any issues with. Drifblim I take a little bit of issue with, solely for the reason that it's very, very, very budget in tier 3. Like, to be clear, I think Drifblim should have probably been tier 2 on this tier list, because the thought of having basically a Tailwind option that can't be faked out with any of the terrain setters seemed really strong to me as a tier 3 option. And seeing it on a non-terrain team is really weird. And yeah, the team's also just like overall very physically oriented if you look at the Pokemon on it. Drifblim can be a special attacker, but special attack's not great. Kinda Oranguru and Gothitelle are the other 2, but then other than that, it's a very physically oriented team, which I don't love. And then when you kind of combine that with some incomplete type cores, what I call niche redundancy, where you have a lot of things doing the same sorts of things, which I think this team has an issue with. I think Dubwool and Gradient effectively do very similar things. They're both normal type Trick Room sweepers, basically. Whenever you have some of that role redundancy that's happening, you essentially lose picks, right? So, yes, Oranguru or Dubwool or Gradient or Gothitelle can all individually come, but because those basically necessitate similar prep, they effectively turn into 1 slot you have to prep for. So this team is operating with 2 slots less than it probably should. I don't think it's a bad team. But I do think that those holes really hold it back for me. I think Leaf can do fine with this team, but it's one that I would actually encourage a couple of transactions just to kind of clean a couple of things up a little bit.
Yeah, I don't think this team is as bad as its ranking may make it seem to be. There are definitely a lot of really good pieces here, and I think if we were ranking it in the VBA last season, it would be much more competitive in the division as a whole, but I think the VBA itself has also gotten a lot more competitive over the past couple of months. But with that being said, let's go ahead and take the next team, which is the Island Dragons. Do you want to give me a breakdown for this team?
Yeah, this team is really interesting. So it is Dragapult, Dracozolt, Aerodactyl, Hippowdon, Pincurchin, Sharpedo, Rapidash, Hitmontop, Dragalge, Delibird, and Glaceon. So kind of sticking, last time they drafted a mono dragon team. This time they've branched out a bit, but there are still obviously a lot of dragon types on this comp. So I want to talk about the things that I think are really, really good about this team first, before I get into why it's kind of ranked where it is. So I think Dracozolt Hippowdon is a really, really good weather mode. Just off the bat, I think that's fantastic. I think that offers the team a lot in terms of really amping up its damage output. I also especially like that paired with the Pincurchin. The Dragapult here is really strong. It offers a lot in terms of its roll compression. Not only can it sweep, but it can set screens, it can do breaking swipe stuff, it can Will-O-Wisp, it can Thunder Wave, give you some speed control, some damage mitigation. I actually think it's going to be used more so in those kind of roles on this team, but the offensive sets will be good. Mostly because, and we'll get to this later, I'm worried about Icy Wind, and I think Clear Body Dragapult's a good kind of middle ground to get around that. Aerodactyl is one of the best Tailwind setters in the format, and it also gets Unnerve, which I think is super good for a team with a bunch of one type. So that way, if something is weak to Dragon and Texahabon Berry, you'll be able to bring out your Unnerve Aerodactyl and you'll be able to still hit it, which I think is really important. Sharpedo seems pretty good in this format for a tier 4 with Speed Boost, but it's also made of paper. Rapidash for a tier 5 is fine. I don't think Rapidash is particularly good. Dragalge as a more special attacker, I think, is a good thing. But we'll get into its... and it also kills fairies, which is nice. Delibird, I think, is one of the better tier 5s. I said it in the other video, too. Giving this team an additional fake-out user with the Hitmontop is really good. Glaceon is actually pretty great for this team. It's actually one of my favorite picks for it. Giving you a really nice special attacker and a good ice resist. And Hitmontop is fantastic in this sort of a format. Really, really versatile Pokemon with a lot of good, not only support options, but just really good pivoting and moveset in general. I think that thing can do pretty well. My main issue with the Island Dragons team is the type weaknesses. Primarily stemming from ice and ground types. This team has very poor ice... very poor time into most ice types, and Icy Wind's one of the better forms of speed control in the format. This team is also extremely Earthquake weak, with a lot of the key mons being pretty weak to Earthquake, including the Dracozolt, Dragalge, Pincurchin, Rapidash, and then a lot of other stuff being hit neutrally. Like, you still don't want Dragapult taking an Earthquake, or Hippowdon taking one, or even Sharpedo, because it's so frail. This team definitely has a lot of power in it, which I really like, because some of the other... when we were doing the other divisions, some of those other teams I felt were really lacking in power, and this team has a lot of that punch it needs. And I think if it gets off the ground running correctly, it actually will be able to sweep some people pretty well, especially with the kind of speed control the arrow gives it. But the type weaknesses are pretty crippling on this team, and I don't think the modes are quite fleshed out enough to make up for those type weaknesses. I think it's a little too severe. I also really like the Trick Room mode here, but it doesn't have a Trick Room setter. So I really like Hippowdon, Pincurchin, and Dragalge all in Trick Room, but there is no setter anywhere. So I think something to have set Trick Room to give you that other final form of speed control is nice. I think those three are insanely good for countering opposing Trick Room, which is something I can definitely see a lot of teams trying to do when you have Dragapult in Sand mode. But I'm still very generally just worried about the type chart into this team. But I think its offensive presence is overall pretty strong, and I like how some of these individual pieces play. I just think that it's almost a little too much of a good thing. There's a few too many things of the same type that are really good that are kind of getting in the way of each other in terms of the spot on the team.
Yeah, I think you're just about nailing it there. I think there's a lot of snowball potential in this team, both for and against it. I think if turn 1 you get Aerodactyl to set up a to set up a Tailwind, you get an attack off with a Dracozolt, that's pretty fast. And then turn 2 you're able to switch into a Hippowdon, you're KOing something else with Dracozolt. Like, you can see a flowchart where this team just starts running away with games, but you also see a flowchart where turn 1, the Aerodactyl gets faked out, and Dracozolt dies to a high horsepower. Turn 2, Blizzard kills 2 things. Like,
Yeah,
This team could have the shortest average game length out of any team, both for and against it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are some picks later on that help with that sort of thing, particularly the Glaceon having a nice Spit F stat, but I don't think it's enough to really boost this team out of here. But it's definitely going to have very short games one way or the other. It's either going to sweep or get swept.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
I can agree with that, but let's take a look at the next team where we have the Gardner Guzzlords. So here we've got our third sand mode in a row with Excadrill Gigalith, and then we've got Togetic, Mr. Rime, Hitmonchan, Golisopod, that is still on the team, Maractus, Stoutland, Mantine, Fracture, and Flareon. There are actually a lot of pieces here that I really like. I think Excadrill and Togetic work together really well. That's to say nothing of the Gigalith as well. Mantine, I think, obviously is the best Tier 5, or right up there with Tailwind, Wide Guard, and good offensive coverage. Mr. Rime is a really functional sort of pivot piece that can do a lot of different things. Hitmonchan gets decent coverage in its tier. Golisopod hits really hard for its tier. Stoutland can run the Intimidate sets or the Sand Rush sets. Fracture and Flareon I'm not as huge a fan on, but Maractus works really well to protect some of your water weak types. So overall, I see a lot of what this team is doing, and I like a lot of it. But it seems like it's missing. Well, special attackers is one of them. Special attacker is a big thing that it's missing, like main special offense. But beyond that, its typings are a little weird to me. The Stoutland seems decent, but maybe a little bit redundant on the team, where if it's not running the Intimidate set. Fracture seems like it's just a pick that's not really going to come that often. I don't know. It feels like it has a lot of punch, but it's just not going to punch enough. And, Charm and Will-O-Wisp exist, and they're really going to put a damper on this team. But what do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, my main issue with this team really boils down to there being like any real special offense. I mean, Mr. Rime is okay at attacking specially. It's got a pretty good special attack stat. But Mr. Rime is traditionally more of a support piece. You're typically going to run it more with Fake Out and Screens and Icy Wind and things like that. You're not going to see Mr. Rime as often be like the primary special attacker for a team, which it definitely is fulfilling that role here. I actually really like the Stoutland pick. I am definitely not against it. I think Stoutland Gigalith Excadrill is a pretty solid sand mode. I really like the utility that the Stoutland especially gives the Gigalith by being able to click after you, which lets Gigalith get off of like really fat rock slides and things like that, which I think are really strong. Mantine also gets Water Absorb, and I actually think that's going to be one of its main uses on the team. I think Storm Drain and Water Absorb on the same comp is good. I think Mantine under this team doesn't super benefit from Tailwind in the same way as some other teams, but I think it's okay under it. The Trick Room mode's a little suspect. You have, after you Togetic, like, you have mons that actually function really well in Trick Room. You've got the Gigalith, Togetic, Golisopod, and then your setter is actually Mr. Rime, which is pretty fast for a Trick Room setter, but it's okay, I guess. But it's just too physical. Like, the team has too much physical orientation. I think some of the typings were doubled up on a little too much because I'm super worried about Quake Slide into the sand, which is not something I thought I'd say very often. But, I mean, if you're drafting something like, one of the problems is with the traditional sand modes is that if you're going Excadrill Gigalith, like, okay, well, you're weak to opposing Earthquake. And it's hard to click Earthquake. It's going to be high horsepower slide a lot of the time. And similarly, Rock Slide eats a lot of these mons, like Togetic, the Mantine, the Flareon, the Golisopod, and the resists aren't bad, but and even Mr. Rime is weak to rock. So, like, I'm not huge on type charts, but on the whole, which I should make clear, I don't even think we really talked about type charts at all in the Johto division, basically. Mm-hmm. But with some of these lower teams in Kanto, I have an issue where if I'm seeing that a very common, if I'm seeing like a very common type weakness or lack of good resists for a plethora of types just like across the board, if I'm seeing that being a problem, I think it's something I have to say. right? I can't just kind of ignore that. But yeah, this team is basically just way too physically oriented for my taste. I think the redirection's good. I think the sand mode's actually pretty solid. I think it has some really nice value picks across the board, but there are just some things here that don't mesh together well. And I feel like that there was probably maybe a snipe or two that kind of hurt whatever they were going for with this team.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I think the Fracture pick and the Flareon pick are two things that, if Bubble's going to be looking at transactions, are going to be things that he's going to want to potentially go for. Like, I do think it just 100% needs another special attacker, just so he doesn't just face only Charm and Will-O-Wisp this entire season for a whole season, because that just sounds awful to play against.
Yeah, Charm, Will-O-Wisp, Intimidate, that's pretty much what you bring against this team.
Yeah. But going from this team to potentially the most interesting team in the division, from my eyes at least, Ryan, why don't you break down the Worcester Stunfisks?
Yeah, this team is really weird. When I was in the early phases of doing the PRs for this division, I DM'd Dan and was like, I don't know how to rate this team. So we have Amoonguss, Mienshao, Talonflame, Luxray, Malamar, Claydol, Mawile, Jellicent, Rutagon, Xcloud, and Vanillix. So this team is really interesting in that it has some pretty amazing support pieces. I really, really, really like Amoonguss, Mienshao, Talonflame, and Jellicent in their respective roles. I think Mienshao is one of the better offensive support pieces available with the U-turn, Regenerator, Fake Out, Coaching, Wide Guard. I think it also gets Quick Guard. It just in general, Mienshao does a lot on this team in one slot. And I actually kind of like that it's a Regenerator core, like you would see in singles with the Amoonguss. I think that that's some really nice switch in, switch out potential. Talonflame, I think, is a great Tailwind setter. No complaints there. You've got double Intimidate with the Luxray and the Mawile, which is pretty cool. You have Jellicent setting TR for this team. And you also have Claydol that can set TR for this team. My main issue really just boiled down to that I really, really love the tools on this team a lot. I am not convinced that the Mons that are here can output the kind of damage that you want it to. This is a team where it's got some nice bulk, it's got some really good tools, but I feel like there's going to be moments where this team is just sitting on the field and letting someone else set up in front of them. Because the kind of offensive threats that I see are things like the Rutagon, Xcloud, Vanillix, and Luxray, and Mienshao. And I don't love that Mienshao feels like one of the bigger offensive pieces on this team, because I like Mienshao to have the option between being a more offensive piece and a support piece, and here it feels like it kind of is going to be forced into that more offensive role. Rutagon I've used before in draft. For a dragon type in its tier, it's definitely not bad, but I'd prefer something with a bit more oomph. Similarly with Xcloud, I mean, yeah, Boom Burst Xcloud, everybody beams and freaks out about that with Scrappy, but you gotta remember, Xcloud only has 91 special attack. It's, even with specs, it's not unbelievable damage. Malamar's pretty cool with Contrary, and it has a nice typing, but it also really requires that boost to get set up, and I can see things like Dazzling Gleam being pretty good into this team. And Vanillix has a really nice special attack stat, but it's also kind of frail, and there's nothing that's abusing any kind of hail mode on this team. It's just really hard for me to envision the game-to-game here. You have some great tools. You got the Boom Burst, you got Water Spout, Jellicent, you got potentially a Guts Luxray and things like that. But at the same time, to me, it feels like it's not like some of the other teams where you kind of lead something and I go, okay, yeah, this is going to come out and it's going to do big damage. It feels like this team is playing a much slower game than the other teams, but I'm not sure it can really afford to, is my problem. I think some of the pieces are a little too frail for that, and I think the offense is a little too lacking on some of these picks to really allow for that. I think it's a really interesting team, though. I'm very interested to see the season with this.
Yeah, conceptually, this feels like a very Curry team where he's going to be building way outside of the box with it, and I think it's going to fit his style a lot. I did message in chat earlier, man, do you know how annoying it's going to be to prep for Amoonguss, Mienshao, Talonflame, and Jellicent all in the same week? Because, I don't know, that just seems like the most annoying thing to prep for. And I give teams a lot of bonus when it comes to being just like hard to prep for. But then I'm looking for, okay, what can exploit the advantages that those 4 are going to be able to build because of prep advantage? And the first thing that came to my mind is Luxray. I'm like, well, if Luxray is the big payoff, I'm suddenly less scared of the big setup, of the big like support threats that can get the battlefield going whatever way he wants. Like, he's going to have an advantage on the battlefield, but I don't think Luxray is going to be able to fully capitalize on it, and I don't see anything else that's as strong as Luxray to do it.
Yeah, that's my issue. Like I said, I feel like there's going to be turns where this team just sits on the field and can't really exert any pressure. And I think that's what I'm really worried about. But it's definitely a cool team. I'm very excited to see this one. And I know Curry's a pretty good coach, so I'm interested to see what he does with it. I think he could definitely do better than 9th overall with it, for sure.
I would agree with that. I think the way I'll put it is some of these other lower teams, it feels like they're just going to get beaten right off the gun in a few games. This team never feels like it's going to lose out of the gate. It just feels like eventually the other teams are going to pass it in like long term. Like you're going to get an advantage because whether you lead Mienshao, Talonflame or Amoonguss and Jellicent, you're going to be able to make the field go to your advantage. But I just don't know if he has the power to capitalize on that.
Yeah, hard agree.
All right, well, moving on to the next team, we've got Sasori and the Greedy Greninjas. So, this is a team that has a lot of interesting pieces. Togekiss, it's Sasori, so of course that's on the team, along with Aegislash, which in both divisions, I think Aegislash is going to be a swing Pokemon. Like, if it overperforms where it is right now, it could really help make the team. If it underperforms, it's really going to hurt the team. Jolteon as a base 130, absolutely love. Starmie's another fast option. Flygon, it's going to be decent. He's got Indeedee Slurpuff, which is annoying because I wanted Slurpuff the round after he picked Indeedee and Slurpuff on the wheel. But good for him. I think they're going to work well together. The Audino I actually like as a Trick Room setter. It's much bulkier than you think it is. It's got a couple other cool sets it can do. Heat Point's not the worst thing in the world. Sock and Shiftry are both decent as well. Like, overall, this team feels really decent. It's got a lot of decent type setups. It's really missing sort of that Discharge Earthquake combo because Jolteon's going to be fine with Discharge, but Flygon as the Earthquake user, like, that doesn't feel like the best thing in the world, but it's not awful, I guess. I think overall this team is, I think solid is a good way to describe this team. It might be lacking some punch, but it's going to have decent speed control options for going fast. It's going to have decent redirection, obviously. But where this team really struggles is if someone decides to run Trick Room against it. Because you have Aegislash, and that doesn't want to operate under Trick Room, and then nothing else really. You've got an Audino, which has Trick Room, and can maybe help swing it back. But, like, if Trick Room goes up against this team, it doesn't feel like he's going to have a great time. But what do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, this is definitely one of the more interesting teams to look at. In general, I found essentially the Greninjas up from here were where I started having the most difficulty with placing the teams, personally speaking. I think this is kind of where we hit a turning point where I think a lot of the teams are, like, very good, and it becomes a lot harder to kind of express what's going on in terms of things I like or dislike. I actually think Aegislash will do really well if you pilot it well, but it's a high skill cap on. But I think knowing the coach, I think it'll be good, but I can't really consider that in my PRs. I think that having the Slurpuff and Indeedee Starmie is, like, super strong, like, really strong. I think that's my favorite thing about the team. Being able to set the Psychic Terrain with the Indeedee and then also have Starmie abuse Expanding Force feels really good. One thing I'm a little worried about are actually just in general, it feels like the team has. It feels kind of weird to say, but the team sort of has the one mode, and it's the terrain mode, and it's really, really good. And it has, I guess, some nice like setup offense. Like you could do like SD Aegislash next to like a Togekiss or a D-Dance Flygon next to Kiss and those kind of things, or just like a setup Kiss with Nasty Plot. But it feels like this team is going to be really interesting because I think it can perform extremely well, but there are just some offensive stats that are a little lacking. And there's also, I'm a little worried about some frailty as well. As for the Trick Room matchup, other than Audino, I think he may be pressured to run in Prison Trick Room and DD Mail more often than he might want, which is fun.
That feels so bad.
I don't. This is an interesting team because I basically like every pick on it, but there's something that's kind of missing for me, which is just really odd. I almost never run into that because a lot of the time when I see a team and I go, yeah, I like every single one of these mons individually, I usually rate the team pretty highly, but there's just some little elements from this one that we're missing to really bump it over the things that we put on top of it. But I think it's very solid. Yeah. I think Greninjas up is where I started having some real challenges.
I think what's missing is a total of 120 base HP and probably 120 offenses. Like, spread between the total mons.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think it's a little frail, if that's probably what we're saying.
Yeah, I think it's a little frail and a little weak, but everything looks good, if that makes sense. Like, there's nothing that screams frail or weak, but I think overall, it just doesn't have the cumulative team bulk or the cumulative team power of some of the higher teams.
Yeah, I'd agree.
But moving on to the next one, we've got the Springfield Spoinks. Before I let you take this one, Ryan, I've got a Jeopardy question for you. Can you name me a Pokemon that has at least one type that's flying, but no great physical flying stab move, and has abilities Intimidate and Moxie?
Oh, yes. I'm going to go ahead. I'll ping in Salamence for... hold on, is that who was Salamence? Is that what I would say?
Yes, but unfortunately the answer we were looking for is Gyarados. Would you go ahead and break down this team for us?
Yeah, so we have Gyarados, Ninetales, Mandibuzz, Gallade, Salazzle, Arctozolt, Shiinotic, Salamence, Nidoqueen, Solrock, and Lileep. Man, this is an interesting team. I actually really like a lot of what it has going on, but it's very interesting. I think having double Intimidate is not a bad thing, but I do worry when your double Intimidate both have 4x weaknesses. Just on the whole, I think that's not great. That kind of sticks out. I really like the Hail mode here with the Ninetales Arctozolt. I think that's really smart. I think it's really strong. Being able to like set Aurora Veil, maybe just click some like straight Hypnosises, or even just click Blizzard or Dazzling Gleam on that. Ninetales is going to be really strong. Mandibuzz is amazing. Dan went on a huge tangent about Mandibuzz in the other video, so I'm not going to bore you too much with the details, but it's basically a mini Suicune. Great Tailwind setter, Foul Play's great, Snarl's great. It'll live every hit. Gallade, I have kind of mixed feelings on. It's a Trick Room setter. Justified's pretty cool as an ability, I guess. It has great coverage, pretty good offensive stats. But I don't really know how well it's going to perform in Tier 3. Salazzle's really interesting. It's basically made of paper, but it's a fake-out user. And it also gives you some nice... it gives you a pretty nice fire type in a draft where there's not a lot of them. Shiinotic, it's a Spore user, which in Tier 5, Spore is great. I would take a Tier 5 Spore user, thank you very much. But other than that, it pretty much just exists in Tailwind. Sorry, not Tailwind. It exists in Trick Room pretty specifically. Salamence is going to be really good in this format, but I'm worried about ice moves, especially on the Hail team, where people might actually just run Blizzard into you. Similarly with Nidoqueen, I'm a little worried people might just run Blizzard into you, but Nidoqueen is an amazing Pokemon, especially behind Aurora Veil or under Tailwind. I think that thing is a big, big, big threat. Solrock as your TR setter seems okay enough to me. I don't love it, but it's okay. And then the Leap gets Storm Drain for a couple of those picks, because this team does have 3 water weaknesses, but I don't think they're that significant. Overall, this team's pretty solid. I think it's got some nice offensive potential. I like the modes it's going for. I think the Trick Room mode's a little underdeveloped. Dan, you're really opposed to having both Gyarados and Salamence on the same team, and I'm not as against it as you are, but it did stick out to me as being like, well, I love Double Intimidate, or I love Moxie and Intimidate, but neither of those mons get a good step flying move, which is a little scary. And
I wouldn't say opposed necessarily, but I think they're filling the roles of like 1.5 Pokemon in 2 tier 1 slots. So I
agree.
I think if you had that one of them being something else, it would be better. I don't think they're going to be bad together, but I think they fill roles that are too similar to one another.
Yeah. I would have loved to see a Lightning Rod user on this team. I'm super sad there's not one here. I think a Lightning Rod user probably would have bumped this team a little bit on my in my measure, and I'm generally just worried about Ice and Electric moves into this team in general. I think Ice Electric coverage looks really nice into a lot of this team, and for a team that is setting Hail frequently with a decent chunk of mons that get Blizzard, I think that's especially worrying. Overall, I think this is a pretty solid team. I think it'll perform really well. I like pretty much all the tools it has. I think it's got a couple interesting kind of offbeat picks that I'm really excited to see how they play out, like the Gallade and the Salazzle and the Shiinotic. I'm really curious to see how they perform, but that's just kind of my overall thoughts.
Yeah, I think I like this team. I think in the tier list, you and I both identified the Hail Sweepers in tier 4 as being incredibly value for the tier list. So I'm very partial to teams that have those, because I think they're great value within the tier. I do think both Gyarados and Salamence are individually good, but I think like I said, there is some role redundancy there, so I would like to see one of them switched out for something else that can probably help with some defensive coverage a little bit. If there's some sort of like tier 1 steel type that's still available, I would love to see that here. Nidoqueen, of course, is amazing. And Mandibuzz, something you might not have gotten about Mandibuzz from the last video. If you use Helping Hand, Mandibuzz can one-shot a Necrozma Duskmane from full with Foul Play.
With Foul Play after the weakness policy activates, yes.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so that's another Mandibuzz fact for you. So I think this team's going to be very solid. I just think the role redundancy hurts it a little bit, and I don't love the Solrock and Leap picks on this team. Like, I understand why they're there, but I don't think they're going to provide huge value for this team. But with that being said, let's take a look at Theo's team, the Beantown Binnacles.
Yeah,
so
what's really fun about these PRs is we both did them totally separately, and then we still have a lot of ties for this division. The other division, we were split a lot more. This one, we were pretty unanimous.
Yeah, it was very, very weird slotting for this division. But, so this team, it starts with Cinderace, Goodra, Cofagrigus, which immediately I love right away. It's got Pelipper, Armaldo, and Poliwrath as a rain mode. I think those are all going to be solid. Copperaja, Marowak, fantastic under Trick Room. I love Copperaja, Cofagrigus together, and I think Marowak's going to add to that as well. And then it's got Rapidash G, which is a Pokemon that exists and is fine in Tier 5, I guess. Rotom Fan is really
policy.
Good. No. Rotom Fan is pretty good value in its tier, and Thwackey is also gives it some ability to fight terrain if it needs to. So overall, there's a lot of solid pieces on this team. I don't rate Cinderace as highly outside of Dynamax, and I think that's one of my main issues with this team, is that it looks very Cinderace reliant, and I think Cinderace and Goodra both benefited a lot from Dynamax, and outside of Dynamax, I don't think they're going to be quite as good. Poliwrath and Armaldo, on the other hand, are going to be even better outside of Dynamax. So I think there is a lot to like here. There's a lot of different modes. Marowak is probably the best value Pokemon in the draft in Tier 4. But, I don't know, this is another one where something's missing, but I think the something here is more tangible in that Dynamax is missing for this team, because this is a team that really wants to operate with a lot of Dynamax options, and I think without it, the power and bulk just aren't quite going to be there for this team. And also Pelipper's the Tailwind setter, which I'm fine with, but Pelipper dies to Discharge all the time. And speaking of Discharge, your Disc Quake combo is going to be really nice, though, with that Rotom fan and that Marowak. That's going to do a lot of damage in a couple games, so that is something that I will give Theo a lot of credit for here. But overall, it feels like this team either wants redirection, wants a better Tailwind setter, or wants Dynamax, and I think missing all three is what just dings this team overall just a bit for me. But what do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, I had a hard time with this team. So I think I really like the Trick Room mode a lot. I'm very biased towards liking it. I think Coppergrigus, Capparaja, Marowak, with probably like Thwacky, Goodra, Armaldo there as the fourth mon, I think is pretty good. I think Goodra is generally a pretty great Tier 2 dragon. I really like Mono Dragon types defensively, and I think it actually offers a lot of nice defensive utility for this team. One thing that can help the bulk on this team is definitely the Thwacky with Grassy Seed procs. I think that might be really good for the Goodra in particular.
Mm-hmm.
The Rain mode I like. I really like Armaldo as a Swift Swim user. Not most people don't. I do. It's got 125 base attack with Stab, Rock Slide, and Bug moves, which I think is really good. It's only I think it gets Liquidation and Aqua Jet. Don't quote me on the Liquidation part, but it gets like a couple water moves too, so it can still kind of abuse the Rain. I know it gets Aqua Jet though for sure. And Poliwrath actually as a Rain sweeper isn't awful or anything, but yeah, and Lightning Rod obviously on Marowak is going to be beneficial. He actually might run Lightning Rod Marowak more than some other teams that have grabbed Marowak. This team has some good value. It has some good typings. All the type cores are covered pretty well. But yeah, I generally agree with you. It's kind of missing some of that oomph factor that I think it needs. I think the modes are really solid, but I also think that a lot of mons here are relatively restricted to those modes.
And it's very physical.
And it's very physical overall. I mean, they have some good special attackers. You've got the Pelipper, Rotom, Goodra, those are all pretty decent-ish special attackers. I mean, hell, even Rapidash Gal is physical most of the time that I've seen them. Yeah. By the way, the best set on that mon, Blunder Policy Hypnosis, because it's a Tier 5, and you miss your Hypnosis, you get double speed, and you try again, and hope you get your value out of it. That little tangent aside, yeah, I really like Cinderace with redirection in non-max formats. Without that redirection, I'm a little concerned with how it's going to perform. I think it'll do well, but I'm not 100% sure how well. So, yeah, I mean, this is a pretty solid team overall. I just think that... And I don't really have any, big, sweeping advice on, here's what I do to fix it. Because I think that for the tiers and what he could get, he did really well.
Mm-hmm. We're really splitting hairs at this part of the draft in Kanto.
Yeah, it's... Like I said, Greninja's up, man. That was where things got really tough. So this is, I think, overall a pretty solid comp.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see him use it.
I can agree with that. But moving on to team number 5, we have the Los Angeles Weasels. Ryan, why don't you talk us through what we're looking at here?
Yeah, so first off, Incineroar and Raichu are pretty much two of the best support mons, period, that are available. They're both insanely good. Incineroar is probably a top 3 mon, in my opinion, in this format. I actually normally don't love Incineroar on the whole, by the way, but with the limited amount of Intimidators, with the pivoting it gives you the typing, I think it's insanely good. This team has a rain mode with the Politoed and Kingdra, which I think is pretty nice. It's got a pretty fleshed out Trick Room mode with the Escavalier, Delmise, Gothorita, Fogus, Munchlax, which I think is cool. And then it also has a little bit of additional things added to that fast mode with the Linoon, with the E-Speed, Belly Drum combo. And then it has a Sliggoo there for some reason. The thing I really like about this team is I think it has some nice multifaceted modes. I think it has really stellar support across the board that is also allowing some good offensive mons to shine. Like, I think that the Incin, Raichu, Gothorita, Fogus all really allow those Kingdra, Delmise, Escavalier, really to get their damage output off. Some problems I have with this team, it doesn't have a lot of spread damage, which is kind of a big oof to a degree. Yes, it has Muddy Water, but I feel it has Muddy Water and it has Discharge off Raichu potentially, but I feel like that's the main sources. The Trick Room mode's pretty physical. I also don't love how many NFEs are here. So you have 4 NFE mons.
5.
And honestly, or 5, sorry.
Wait, no.
One?
Sorry, I forget that.
Linoon doesn't count.
Okay.
This Linoon doesn't count. This Linoon's a fully evolved boy that stands on his own 4 feet. But you've got 4 NFE mons, and in my opinion, 3 of them want Eviolite. So that Eviolite Focus Sash question is going to be pretty tough each week, especially when you have a Raichu on the team that also wants that Focus Sash. I think the Escavalier is great for this Trick Room mode, just to have, because I think Escavalier in Rain is always really, really good. I feel like Linoon and Munchlax do kind of the same thing, which is click Belly Drum and be a normal type, but one does it fast and one does it slow. And I don't know if you needed 2 Pokemon to do the same thing there, but I do think they're both 2 of the best tier 5s, so I'm not going to harp on it too bad. So yeah, this is a really good team overall. For me, my main issues are mostly a little bit of a spread damage. I'm worried about where the Eviolite and Focus Sashes go. And also, I mean, this is like a tiny nitpick of anti-synergy, but obviously Incineroar is a fire type. One of the main things on this team's a rain mode. I don't think that's a big deal because it's an Incineroar, but hey, I should probably say it out loud because if not, someone will yell at me. So
yeah, I think this team is really solid. Obviously, I ranked it 4th overall. And I think in my mind, it's a pretty clear 4th as well. Ryan disagreed and put it 5th, but the next team is also very, very solid. But just looking at the team, if there was one critique that I had for this team, it's the narrow options for actually dealing damage versus supporting damage. Your damage dealers are going to be mostly Kingdra, Delmise, Escavalier, and Linoon, whereas everything else is sort of a chip support type. Those are going to be your big chunkers. And 3 of them are physical. You might be able to build around them a bit easier than you can around a team that has, 6 decent damage dealers, but, again, that's getting very, very nitpicky. I think there's a lot of solid things this team can do. I can't wait to see Perish Song come out of Politoed with the Gothorita trapping stuff on the field. There's just a whole bunch of degenerate things it can do, and I think this is going to be a very solid team that's going to, have some big wins this season.
yeah, I think so too. I think this is a really good team. I probably might have come across as a little too critical, but I do like it a lot. I did rate it top 5. I think it's very well deserving of that. And I'm very excited to see their season.
Yeah, but up next we have Rebellion. So, Ryan, I know you had something you wanted to say to Lucian before we started going into this team.
Yeah, so we did VDL PRs, and Lucian Rebellion, the coach of this team, his team in VDL, I looked at and I said in the PR video, I was like, I don't really get it. This team I get, it's really good. So, nice job.
All right, so breaking down why we get this team. Arcanine, great tier 1, does a lot of things really, really well. Nothing great, but a lot of things at a really top level. Dragonite, one of the few Pokemon that can successfully use weakness policy inside this format, and it's really strong. we've got Inteleon, which is really fast, hits pretty hard, and it's going to be used well in this format. And all this is supported by, I'm going to cut down to one of those free picks, the Whimsicott, which is probably the best Tailwind setter in the format, maybe. It's still a little fake out weak.
It's the best one, I think.
Yeah, it's either Whimsicott or Crobat, because Crobat can't be faked out. But
yeah,
I think
I'd agree.
There's a strong argument that it could be Whimsicott. Kangaskhan gives you Scrappy Fake Out. It's got a lot of power. It's got a lot of cool options that it can use inside the tier. Galvantula can do some cool things with Compound Eyes, and it's an Unnerve user. Steelix is a solid Trick Room option, and the Trick Room is a lot of NFE options with Porygon and Togepi, but overall I like it. Plus Togepi gives you a really budget redirector. Grapple Locked, I don't get it. I don't like it.
I love it. Grapple Lock's actually one of my favorite picks on this team. It's part of the reason it got number 4.
I don't get the Grapple Lock. I don't like it. I'm going to let Ryan talk about it. But everything else, including the Skuntank, I think is really good on this team. There's some pretty clearly defined modes. It's got a lot of latent power. It's got good speed control options, and it's got a lot of bulk, some very versatile Pokemon, and some Pokemon that do very specific things really well. But Ryan, why don't you explain why Grapple Lock is the most important pick on this team?
Grapple Lock is not the most important Pokemon, but it's one of my favorites. I love Grapple Lock, underutilized Mon. This team really needed something, I think, to flesh out its Trick Room option a bit, and I think Grapple Lock does a great job of giving it a nice offensive Pokemon for Trick Room with pretty good coverage, and I like the abilities on it, so I support the Grapple Lock pick. I think it was cool. Just the overall, the speed control on the fast end's really solid. You got the Electro Web, the Icy Wind, and the Tailwind coming from the Inteleon, Whimsicott, and Galvantula. I think you have a lot of great supportive pieces here overall. I think Arcanine's going to serve you really well. I like the support that the Inteleon and Kangaskhan give you, in addition to being really solid offensive threats in of their own right. I think Dragonite's one of the best tier 2s that was available on the list. I rate it very highly in non-max formats. I think that the ability for Dragonite to have multi-scale and to be able to set up, or just run in focus and be able to set up, is really, really valuable, and definitely a guessing game on the part of the person who you're playing against. And I think that's facilitated well by a nice Whimsicott pick. Skuntank feels pretty good here. I think it helps you deal with some of those fairies that might be giving this team a little bit of trouble. I think Kangaskhan's one of the better tier 3s that was available. Togepi's great budget for where it's at, and I really like having redirection on this comp specifically, because I feel like there are some things that can set up with the Togepi that wouldn't be able to set up as well otherwise. My only real critique is I think the Trick Room mode's a little underdeveloped. I love the Grapple Lock, Togepi, and Steelix, and Porygon as far as a tier 5 Trick Room setter after Audino is off the board is fine. But I still don't think it's an outstanding, I still don't think it's an outstanding Trick Room mode, but I'm very, very sold on this bulky offensive fast mode with having the kind of power it needs to break through, and it's got a nice mix of special and physical offense, which a lot of teams had a really hard time with. So, really nice job. This was, I think, a really good team.
Yep, I agree with that as well. Before we move on to the next team, I just want to have a quick note. For 3, 2, and 1, Ryan and I were unanimous in our final rankings, but I think stratified them very differently. I think any of the top 3 are basically interchangeable in terms of order, but Ryan thinks there is a very clear order. But with that being said, Ryan, I will let you handle team number 3, which we both put as the Twinleaf Town Tyrannitars.
Yep, this is a Rillaboom team, so it gets near top of PRs as God would intend in this draft. They have Rillaboom, Azu, Corv, which just starting off, Rillaboom, Azu, Corviknight is probably one of my favorite cores I've seen so far out of any team. I think that's outstanding. Then it has Gardevoir, Machamp, Trevenant, Rhydon, Volcarona, Avalugg, Shedinja, Barbaracle. I like a lot of what this team has going on, a lot. I think that it is... I really like, obviously, the Rillaboom, Azu, Corv. That's just a ton of offensive power and a ton of utility all kind of slotted into one. You got Fake Out, you got Belly Drum, you've got Yawn, you've got Unnerve, you have Mirror Armor to bounce back Intimidates, you have the Iron Defense set. You have the Tailwind set, so where Corviknight can basically function like a Mandibuzz. Like, there is so much nested within those 3 picks alone in terms of set potential and options that it's a little ridiculous. I think this team has some nice fleshed out special attackers with the Gardevoir and Volcarona. Obviously, Volcarona can be used as a redirector, but on this team, I feel like it's mostly going to come in mid-late game under Tailwind and try to sweep and click nice Heat Waves and Dazzling Gleam. That's also where most of the spread damage comes from. Right on for a Lightning Rod user for the Azu and the Corviknight, I'm definitely not opposed to, especially in Tier 5. Avalugg for Wide Guard and a nice just defensive pivot seems okay. Shedinja is going to be very good in a format like this, especially on a team with some kind of a couple of shared weaknesses. I think Shedinja can cover those pretty nicely. Machamp as being like a bulky Tier 3 fighting type, I think is fine. Trevenant, I would have preferred another Trick Room setter, like even something like Runerigus would have probably been better. I never loved doubling Ice typing, and I find Trevenant to be a little unreliable at the role whenever I've used it in the past, but I think the Harvest set is obviously going to be a lot better in a non-max format. And then Barbaricle's a nice sweeper, and you can click Shell Smash, and you can click Rock Slide and Liquidation and whatever, and get some KOs. This team's really good. My main issues with it mostly boil down to the speed control options. I think that like I said, I'm not huge on Trevenant. I think the Trick Room mode in general is kind of lacking. Because it feels like it's a zoom roll, and I feel like if you're prepping for this team, you're doing everything in your power to not let a zoom roll sweep you. So I feel like with the Trick Room mode being mostly centered on that Azumarill Avalugg, Trevenant, I don't super love that. Obviously, Gardevoir can set Trick Room as well. I think there are a few too many like fire neutralities and weaknesses for me, especially on a team with Rillaboom. I think that's a bit of a problem, especially when Shedinja's kind of supposed to be a more defensive-oriented piece. When you have the Rillaboom that's weak to it, the Corv that's weak to it, the Trevenant that's weak to it, the Volcarona that's neutral to it, that's the Redirector, the Avalugg that's weak to it, and the Shedinja, it's like, okay, that's a lot of potential issues with fire types. And a lot of the team's pretty physical. Like, it has 2 really good special attackers, but I could see things like Will-O-Wisp and Charm being kind of an issue. But overall, I mean, it's a solid team. It does have some holes, though, where I think that kind of maintains it in this spot at number 3.
Yeah, I would agree that this team is very solid. As I was going through power rankings, there were some moments when I was looking at this team and thinking this could be number 1, and I still think it definitely could be. I think if this team was going to upgrade somewhere that would boost it even closer to that number 1, is I'm looking at that Machamp slot, because you've got a lot of mid-speed, bulky, physical offense, and I just don't think Machamp does it as well as Rillaboom or Azumarill does. I don't really see what it adds to the team on top of that. I'd prefer to see that be like, I don't know, something fast. I don't care if it's support-oriented or offensive, but I just think something that has a high base speed, so your fast mode isn't entirely reliant on that Corviknight. Because right now, if someone's matching Tailwinds with you, you're not going to be moving first most of the time, and that makes me a little nervous about this team, thinking that you're going to be relying so much on going into Trick Room when Rillaboom is base 85 and Azumarill is base 50. So I do think the speed control is an issue, and I think that Machamp is the slot you want to look to upgrade that. But overall, awesome team, really solid. The Fire, Water, Grass core is probably the best in the league. Rillaboom should be banned. I'm going to say again that Rillaboom exists, but Regice is banned, and that makes me sad. But with that being said, let's move on to Mr. Joe and the Corpus Christi Kinglers. He upgraded his team name. He has evolved both in name and drafting style. His old logo had a Kingler in it. This new logo, I'm going to call that a Kingler, because if that's a Krabby, I'm going to be really sad. But no, that's obviously a Kingler. So first thing with the Corpus Christi Kinglers, Garchomp Primarina I ran last season in the MDL. It's awesome. Those two together work so well, and Rotom Heat is basically the perfect complement to it. That's almost perfect defensive and offensive synergy with stabs. Scizor, great piece to go with it. Scizor is sort of like the tier 1 killer it goes after... It loses to a lot of things that are lower tiers than it, but it beats a lot of things that are in the tiers above it. It's like the opposite of Rillaboom, which Rillaboom loses one-on-one to a bunch of tier 1s, but crushes everything tier 2 and below. Gourgeist, I could be sold on. It's going to be decent as a Trick Room setter, decent mode that way. Espeon is fine. It's got screens. Yeah, it's a special attacker.
Screens, yawn, special attacker. It's pretty basic.
Yeah.
Nice speed tier.
Torracat I really like. It doesn't have Snarl, but it has Will-O-Wisp, it has Fake Out, it can use Parting Shot. It's got a lot of really nice defensive options there. Throw, Lickitung, and Lurantis can help flesh out that Trick Room mode a bit more, and the Primarina can also work on the Trick Room mode or in a fast mode with Tailwind. My one issue with the team is that Unfezant is an uninspired Tailwind setter, and I know it's tier 5, and that's really nitpicky. If there's a tier 3 one that you could use instead of Espeon, and then get an Espeon replacement in tier 5, like... that would be the change I make on this team, because Garchomp and Primarina under Tailwind, I think I had a total kill death of something like 39 and 14 with the MDL last season, but I needed to be moving first with them, because if they're moving second, there's just too many weaknesses between those two that eventually they're just going to be overwhelmed no matter how powerful they are. And that is the one critique I have on this team, is that Unfezant is uninspired as a speed control option. But otherwise, I really like this team. I think it's the best one I've ever seen Krabby draft. And it is going to be absolutely terrifying this season. But Ryan, what do you think?
Yeah, Krabby, I've been critical of a few of your teams in the past, and I will admit that. This is hands down your best team, and you earned this spot. It's really, really good. I think basically you sold me with those 4 picks. The Garchomp, Rotom Heat, Primarina, Scizor. I was like, okay, this team is definitely top 5. Like, I saw the defensive, offensive synergy, saw the nice mix of special physical offense. Mons like Scizor are also kind of nice because, like, hidden power is not a thing. Which people don't bring up a lot, but that means that a lot of things that used to like run hidden power fire don't get it anymore. So it's actually a lot harder to hit a mon like Scizor, because there's outside of like mystical fire getting more distribution, outside of like actual fire types, fire moves are very like limited. I want to clarify something. So the VDL thinks I hate Gourgeist now, because in VDL Gourgeist was tier 2 and I said it's not worth a tier 2 slot. I actually like Gourgeist. I think it's really good. It's worth a tier 3 slot for sure. Just so we're all on the same page. I think Gourgeist in tier 3 is great here. I really like what it offers the team. I think Torracat is just too good of value to pass up in tier 4. I don't love the doubling of the fire type, but since the other fire type levitates, I'll give it a pass. Especially because I think that tier 4 Torracat gives his team a whole lot of utility and that fake out user and that intimidate that it really needs. Something we haven't even mentioned, this has the best Disc-Quake combo, period, that I've seen on any team. The Garchomp Rotom Heat is the best Disc-Quake in the league, and it is absolutely terrifying. That is a very hard Disc-Quake to beat, especially because it can get very fast. I mean, a Scarf Garchomp or a Scarf Rotom Heat can really push that speed tier over the edge to allow Krabby to gain that advantage he's looking for. The Trick Room mode's slightly... I think the throw Lurantis is going to be good. I've seen Lurantis really kick a lot of ass in a couple of seasons, so I'm getting progressively sold that Lurantis is a good pick. And yeah, Unfezant for a tier 5. I agree with Dan. I think you should consider swapping Espeon for a better Tailwind setter than Unfezant, but as far as it goes, Unfezant is pretty consistent at setting Tailwind and doing literally nothing else. Had it for an entire season. I ran calcs with it constantly, trying to make it work offensively. It never did. I didn't like it from an offensive standpoint, but for a Tailwind setter, it's bulky enough to get the job done. Really great team overall. I should be super happy with it. Real threatening to go up against. I think there's a couple typing redundancies here, a couple little things you could change, but like overall, it is very hard to get past how threatening a lot of these options are, and how, if with just a little bit better speed control, I think this is probably better than the top team overall. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but speaking of that top team, Ryan, I know you hate rating my teams number 1, so why don't you break it down for me?
I do. just so we're all clear, in VDL, I gave Dan's team like third. In MDL, I think I've rated it second, I think once, but I mostly rate it like I try to avoid stroking Dan's ego too much. But I try to do my PRs fair, and I was looking over the team, and I was like, yeah, this is probably the best team, and I kind of hate that it is. It does have problems, which I'm definitely going to get into because I like roasting Dan. Even though I'm the one who drafted this.
Yeah, wait, I didn't draft this team. Go on.
Okay, moving on. Okay, so we have the Indeedee, Marowak, Crobat, Aromatisse, Nidoking, Arctovish, Stonjourner, Liepard, Abomasnow, Berserker, Rotom. I just want to say I think the first 3 picks are really stupid. Indeedee is one of the better mons. Indeedee F's one of the best mons available. And I want to talk specifically about Marowak. So very early on in the tier list, because Dan's never played in a Dynamax format, he was asking me, hey, or non-Max format. He was like, hey, is there anything that really sticks out in like tier 1, tier 2? And I was like, Marowak A like won Worlds when its stab move was Shadow Bone. Now it gets Poltergeist. And obviously draft is different than something like ladder and winning Worlds, because, Pachirisu's won Worlds, but it's still going to be rated shit in draft. But I've seen Marowak A just completely annihilate teams. Like, it's still an insanely strong mon in draft. Ghost Fire Ground is just absolutely brutal, and Ghost Fire Stab is really hard to handle, and you can't fake it out, especially next to an Indeedee. So I think that's insanely strong, especially with Crobat, where that gets Inner Focus. It works. It has that speed tier where it can work really well under Tailwind with proper prep, and it also works super well in Trick Room. And the Trick Room setter is Aromatisse, which I also love that. I think Aromatisse is one of the premier Trick Room setters available. A lot of the Trick Room setters overall were placed in Tier 2 in this draft, and I think grabbing the best Tier 3 one was definitely good value. Nidoking's an absolute beast. I don't love how it defensively meshes with your team. I think that it adds some ground weakness. I think that the ground weakness starts to stick out a bit with your team when you factor in Nidoking, because then you have Marowak, Stonjourner, Nidoking, and Berserker that are all weak to ground, which I really, really don't like. I actually think it's the biggest flaw with the team. But on the other hand, you have solid resists, and Nidoking is a special or physical attacker that can just Oko stuff, like left and right. Like, it's super, super, super powerful. I've used Nidoking plenty of times. It's very good. You have a budget hail mode. I think a very budget hail mode. Arctovish, Abomasnow really helps with that ground weakness, and it helps with it a lot. Having water and grass stab available to help you handle those typings that your team struggles with, I think is really, really good. And I think the Arctovish and the Abomasnow are overall going to be pretty viable, actually. A lot of people thought the Abomasnow was a pretty good pick in chat live when I made it. And I think it's actually very good. It's traditionally done pretty okay in VGC formats that are non-max. Stab Blizzard's always good. Stab Hail Blizzard is always good. And that was before we had a good abuser like Arctovish. I think it'll perform well. Berserker gives you an additional fake-out user with Indeedee and Liepard. It's also just a really good Trick Room sweeper, because right now your Trick Room mode was lacking outside of that Arctovish Marowak, so it kind of gives you a little bit of an extra something for that Trick Room mode, just a lot of power. Rotom gives you Disquake with a Nidoking, and gives you another special attacker with some nice utility moves too. I mean, Rotom has a pretty decent speed tier and gets things like Eerie Impulse, Will-O-Wisp, that kind of thing. And Stonjourner is one of the best tier 5s. I, at the time in the draft, was like, oh man, I was going for Linoon. And then after I did a bunch of research on Stonjourner, I went, yeah, Stonjourner was the best tier 5 available. Okay. Really, really, really powerful Pokemon. 125 base attack, combined with the mons on your team that benefit immensely from Power Spot, I think is really, really, really solid. And Liepard is a super synergistic piece. It's really good in Psychic Terrain. It allows DD to operate as an offensive mon with the Psychic Seed and Burden set. And then if you don't want to run Psychic Seed and Burden, that's okay, because the regular Prankster variant is just as viable and works even better with most of the other modes. I think this team has a really nice mix of power, utility, tons of different modes, great speed control. My main issue with it mostly boils down to type weaknesses. That's about it.
Yeah, I'm a fan of this team. it was weird with how we had to do the mobile draft because I was at my in-laws' house, so I was messaging Ryan, watching the draft unfold, being like, hey, what do you think about these 3 things? I don't actually know if they're still on the draft board, like that kind of thing back and forth. So it was sort of like a hodgepodge of us both attempting to draft it. He got the Rotom and the Stonejourner late when the picks we wanted there were sniped, and I am very happy with the way it turned out. I think the Budget Hail is super budget, super good. I think the Disquake mode, not just with the Nidoking, but, you know, I can also run Disquake next to Marowak pretty easily, and
Yeah.
that's going to be pretty good. And I think trying to prep for this every week, like, if I say you have to prep for Liepard, Crobat, and DDF every week, like, you hate yourself, because first thing, you don't know if the Indeedee is going to come, and if it is the Liepard going to be Unburden, or is it going to be Prankster? Like, and Theo commented to me that I run Mental Herb on my Trick Room setters way too much. I don't need to do that, because you can't taunt Aromatisse, so I can actually run other items. Like, I think there's just a lot here, and I'm a big fan of the team, so thank you for the help with that. Ryan, you are the only person in the league who has the draft proxy tag, and I think it is well earned. You are a good proxy.
Yay, I proxied. Yeah, obviously this is the team that we came up with, so obviously we're biased towards seeing that. We've looked at all the intricacies of this team, we know it's super in and out, but even with that said, I think it's a really solid team. I will also comment that if we did a full, 24 full division thing, Dan's team would actually not be number 1.
No,
I think the
Goomer's team would absolutely be number 1.
Goomer's team would absolutely be number 1. I think Dan's team would be probably 3, maybe 4 even, which actually can lead to my discussion I want to have about the differences between the 2 drafts. So
before we do that, let me just move over to the last page on Kanto, then we can talk about the differences between the 2 drafts. Go ahead.
All right. So overall, our power rankings, we have the Alexander Arcanines at number 1, Corpus Christi Kanglers at number 2, Twinleaf Town T-Tars at 3, Rebellion at 4, Los Angeles Weasels at 5, Beantown Binnacles at 6, the Springfield Spoinks at 7, the Greedy Greninjas at 8. Isn't it Worcester? I always forget how to pronounce it.
Worcester, I think.
Okay, Stunfisks, good. The Gardener Guzzlords at 10th, the Island Dragons at 11th, and the Latchkey Kids at 12th. Yeah, overall, to me, I was kind of looking at it, and I was in the live draft. I was in the chat while we were all chatting. This division had a lot of sniping happening very frequently, and I think it kind of shows in that. But however, I think this also meant people thought a lot more about some of their teams, and I think that as a result, a lot of these teams overall felt better in the middle than some of the Johto teams did. So, like, because I rate every team on a scale of 1 to 10, and then I organize them in a list, and then any tiebreakers I sort out, which I usually have a lot of tiebreakers. But like out of 10, overall, I rated this division, like the other division had a couple like 9s and 9.5s and things like that at the top. The highest I gave this division was like an 8 or a 9 to Dan. And then it's mostly like 8s and 7s since things like down the board from there. But on the other hand, in the other division, I was a lot more critical of a lot more teams and had a lot more like those 6s, 6.5 kind of things throughout consistently. So I think that this division had a lot more power spread more evenly. And I think the teams are a lot closer in this division than they are in Johto. Just in terms of when I was analyzing, I noticed that my scores in this division were overall much closer than they were in Johto. The tops and highs were a little bit more significant in that division. But I was wondering if you had a similar experience or not.
Yeah, when I started my power rankings, I found Johto a lot easier. Well, first of all, because I'm like, oh, obvious number 1. Bink, and then I could start from there. I think Johto in the middle had a lot less clear striation than Kanto did. Kanto was very easy to put into tiers, and then within the tiers it became fairly easy to sort. The Johto tiers were also semi-easy to do, but especially that middle tier in Johto, there is a lot of jockeying back and forth that could have gone in any direction, whereas in Kanto, like, I think we came to pretty similar consensus on a lot of teams, even coming to these rankings pretty independently. So
Yeah.
I do think that there was some weird power creep, and the fact that it is the two divisions will meet in the playoffs, it may show that the top end in Johto, because they got sniped less often, might be stronger than the top end in Kanto. But we will have to see how that plays out as the season progresses.
Yeah, thanks for having me on for these PRs. It's been a lot of fun. Everybody can just comment at me in the VBA chat. Y'all know who I am by this point. So if you have any questions or anything you want to chat about, my DMs are always open, especially after PRs. I just like helping people with their teams. And like we said, I mean, we don't expect these overall PRs to be, how things play out. They're not predictive. No, they're mostly for fun.
Except for the number one slot. The number one slot is correct.
Oh, right. Of course. The number one slot is going to be Goomer and not you. Moving on.
All right. But yeah, thank you for helping me out with this, Ryan. I know it's always a lot of work to get them looking decent. And thank you guys all for watching what is now probably into the third hour of VBA content that I'm putting out in a 1 or 2 day period. So with that being said, let us know what we got wrong in the comments below, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you when the season starts. Bye.